We're golden.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I am Rev. I am the GM and producer of the first 6 seasons of The Crit Show, but I am the producer for everything The Crit Show does, with a handful of things, with the exception of a handful of things on our Patreon. We have made actual play content now for a little over 7 years. We do a weekly show in addition to a weekly show on our Patreon. And then we also make Let's Plays for newly releasing or recently funding games. And our goal in that is that we will sit down with the creator of the game, and usually they will be the one to run us through it. And over the course of 3 to 4 hours, we will do character creation to kind of end of session experience, whatever the equivalent of that is for that game, and then break it up in a way. And I'll kind of talk about checklists in a little bit. But the intent is that an audience member can listen to that and feel comfortable enough after just listening to those 3, 4 episodes to be able to sit down and play that game. And that is kind of our mission statement on everything that we make, is that we try to make it so that simply by listening to an arc of our story, you will be able to play that game when you sit down at your own table. Um, and that actually kind of gets into one of the first elements of creating an actual play podcast and really creating any art. This is a very interesting audience for me because you are all artists in your own rights. You're writers, creators. You are, a lot of you, making the things that I like to spend my time doing. And so there is that element of a mission statement, whether that is personal or for your company, but knowing kind of what is your guiding value that you always look back to. And it's been very helpful for us to have sat down and made a mission statement before we even published our first episode, because anytime a question came up, whether it was about how do we work with somebody? Are we doing this thing? Are we getting compensated for it? Are we willing to throw in with X, Y, or Z? If we're uncertain, we can always look back to that mission statement, and hopefully it will give us some advice or clarity on where exactly we should go. Um, so that's kind of gets into the entire, business side of it, which again, most of you here will have experience with, that being most likely small business owners or LLCs of your own. Um, and having that conversation with the group of people that you are going to work with beforehand is really, really good, so that you know who is in charge of what, who makes what decisions, how are decisions that are maybe tied broken, and getting all that down in writing. Because, for us, we're very fortunate. The people that we work with are our friends, and that's ideally the situation where you're able to create content like this. But it does get into muddy ground if something comes up, two people are passionate about a thing, a decision has to be made. Knowing in advance how that decision is made, and if a consensus can't be, um, if we can't come to a consensus, how is that tie broken, or who is the final decision maker? And so you can look at really any good theater. You can even look at the sets of television shows to see what their flow charts are, to understand who reports to who makes what decisions, and lay that all out for yourself in the beginning. And this does sound like a lot of work, and it is, but it is work up front to hopefully make your time in the future easier and less stressful. Um, and so we did all of that ahead of time when we started the Crit Show, because I, with my background in theater, knew that I wanted it to try to grow into something, and had seen many of the pitfalls that you can come across with that kind of stuff. So, business side aside, um, I want to talk about the actual parts of constructing your actual play. Um, and so there are one of two ways that you can go when it comes to that kind of first step. You've got to have your players, you've got to have your system. Um, when we first started out, we found our players first, because this was the group of people we were all agreed that we wanted to try to create something, and we could all dedicate X amount of time and X amount of spoons to it on a weekly or monthly basis. After that, we went through the process of discovering what game we wanted to play. And for us, we had initially started out as a Pathfinder actual play, and no content of that exists because we sat down ahead of time to record episodes. And I was using that opportunity as a time to test the audio equipment, to understand better how that all worked, how it would work in the room that we were in, as well as learning to edit. And we got into a place where we were going back and running the same thing over and over again because I was still trying to test this audio equipment, that we started doing one shots of other things just so that we would give ourselves a break from the story we thought we were going to be telling. We did a one shot of Monster of the Week. One of the guys that we had invited over left. One of the guys who was going to be in the show left. And myself and the other person looked at each other and went, "Oh no, that's the show." And then we had to figure out how to make it work from there because the interactions, the energy on mic, all of those things worked. And so suddenly we were like, "Oh no, this is the system that we need to tell this story in." Which kind of brings me to the way that we pick games now. We have a process where anyone who's going to be involved with one of the shows can submit a pitch. They basically give us an elevator pitch for the story they want to tell, including number of players, the game system, and just what they think the kind of initial hook is. From that, I will collect all of those, and then we'll find some time to sit down and play a one shot of each of those submitted one shots and games. From that, typically a front runner presents itself, and we go, "Yeah, this is the one we're all excited about." If it ever comes to a point where we have 5 people involved, and one of them was running both the games, and 2 people want to do one, 2 people want to run the other, I'll put together a survey asking about all the games we played, asking them to rank them, from 1 to 5 or whatever, and I'll kind of give it a point system. And the very first thing I'll ask on that is there any game you're not interested in playing in? And I just remove that right away. Because if we're not having fun at the table, if we're not enjoying ourselves, that's going to come through on the microphones. And so I want to make sure that everyone involved is not just excited about the story and the other players, but they're excited about that game as well. And so then from there, I would be like, "Okay, this is the one that came out on top. How does everybody feel?" And we haven't had a situation yet where we were like, "Well, I wish something else had won." And so those are the 2 ways that we go about picking the games. This also gets into a whole other conversation about your scope of reach. One of my favorite things, before we started, I sat down and I made myself listen to the first episode of 50 different actual play podcasts because I wanted to know what I liked, what I didn't like, what I thought worked, what were pitfalls that I wanted to avoid, what were things that I wanted to lean into. And that gave me a whole lot of information. Um, Back in, I think it was 2001, Apple had done a survey of all of their podcast listener data and stuff like that. And they had discovered that in the first 13 minutes of a podcast is the most likely time for someone to stop and not restart it. If people make it past 23 minutes, they typically finish it out. And that has the highest likelihood of people subscribing to it. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that whatever is going to happen, we're in it by that 13-minute mark. So character creation, we absolutely, do a session 0. We do all of that stuff beforehand, but then we presented a truncated version of it. Now, in future seasons, we will do a session 0 that we'll release later that has the full nitty-gritty of world and character creation. But for the listening audience in general, I want to create something where, all right, here's 2 minutes for this character, this one, and this one. It's all kind of flowy, but by time we hit the 10, 11-minute mark, I'm hitting you all with the plot hook already. And again, that's really just for the first episode, or if you're switching to a new game system, things like that. that kind of brings up the other element of when you are dealing with recording a podcast. The other thing that was in that survey was that if you have a podcast and you have more than 12 episodes and at least a dozen people have listened to every one of those episodes, you're already in the top 50% of podcasts. Now, the scope of growth in podcasts is enormous. Our podcast currently is in the top 99.1% of podcasts. But the difference between 99.1 and 99.2 is literally over 10 times larger than 99.1 to 0. That gap between those two is astronomical because, and a lot of this, you can attribute to the pandemic. This is where you start getting shows that have celebrities who were bored, who have a name. So I tell you all of that to say it is a very crowded field, but it's not too crowded, especially if you have an intent behind what you're doing, you know who you want your audience to be, and you create something that you yourself would listen to. Um, you know, there is a place to live in that 99.1%. We are not bringing in 10 million people an episode, but we're in a place where um, I can pay the people who work for me. We can pay our taxes. I can stay out of jail. All great things. Um, and so, yeah, I bring all that up to say it is a very crowded market, but it is not so crowded so long as you know what it is you want to tell a story about. And again, for all of you here, it's very likely that you are looking to, tell stories using either the games that you have created or worked on, and you already know an underserved market, most likely. We started in Monster of the Week, and at the time, 7 years ago, Powered by the Apocalypse games, indie games in general were an underserved market. It's not quite as underrepresented as it was before. Now you can go out and you can find 30 different Monster of the Week shows. When we started, there were two or three. But that doesn't mean that there are not still audiences for games that are not being served. So the ability to serve those audiences is very beneficial. That is something that crosses over, not just from theater, but television and movies. So getting into the actual creation of the show. This is where your voice as the producer is going to be very important because you have to make some decisions about timing. How long are your episodes going to be? How frequent are your episodes going to come out? What is the amount of out of character chatter? What is the amount of we are in the story only? What is the amount of rules talk? And this varies widely in the industry. There are people who are able to get away with sitting down and running a game for 4 hours, and people will sit down and devour that 4 hours. There are other areas of the internet where people want something that's the length of a sitcom or, maybe a relatively funny drama. The thing that we shoot for is I record 70 to 75 minutes. And then after editing and truncating out silence, that generally turns into between 40 to 55 minutes of episode. I want something that feels like a full meal, but is not so much that you can't get through it in a single sitting. This will change as you start to create because it used to be that time was the most important thing because I was like, okay, well, I know that that's a good episode length. Now I can listen as we're playing, as we're telling a story, as I'm editing, and boy, this was only 35 minutes, but that was a lot. So I'm going to stop here. I think this is a good ending place. Or, we've been going for like an hour, but we haven't really gotten anything accomplished. And so I don't know how much of this might go on the floor. So let's keep going until we feel like character wise, something notable has happened. I really attribute this to comic books in a lot of ways because I've noticed over the whatever 30 some years that I've been reading comics that sometimes you read a comic book and you get through it and you think that, well, that was nothing. And then other times you read a comic and it's so dense that you have to put it down and come back and finish it later. So I want to create something that is in that middle ground. Um, a lot of this is going to be really basic knowledge, but I think it is important to note. You start your recording, whether everyone is in the same room or if they are online in separate spaces, but you start with a good 10 seconds of room tone so that whoever is editing later has the room tone to go back and edit that stuff out or add it in places. We also want to make sure that as we're editing, if you are the producer, you're listening for good spots where there could be break for ads if you're going to have them somewhere in the middle. You're also listening for a place to end. I start to keep an eye out on the time when I feel like it's getting about an hour and 10 minutes. And at any point in that, I can tell, either myself if I'm running it or the GM, like, hey, just a heads up, you don't need to rush, but you could end at any point now. Or, we're a little short, so keep going if you think that there's more to this character's scene, you don't want to cut away yet, don't feel like you have to, just to give them a sense of where are we going, where are we at time wise. And that is something that I feel has worked very well in our show, is the editing and the length and where to end episodes. Again, if you're doing something that's longer, if you are doing a a 4-hour episode, that's not something you have to worry about as much of. But if you're doing like we're doing and sitting down and recording, yes, for 4 hours, but knowingly breaking it up into hour-long chunks, I do want to keep an ear out for that as I'm going through. Processing your audio is going to vary wildly depending on your setup. Those are questions that I would be happy to answer through emails or office hours or anything like that. But the thing that I do want to say that is most important to me when it comes to getting my audio together is I truncate the silence. I truncate the heck out of my silence. If there is a silence that is over 0.5 seconds, it automatically gets dropped down to 0.5 seconds. Because, again, with my background in theater, my belief is that silence has to be earned. So I would rather add in silence a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds at a time than remove seconds, 10, 20 minutes worth of silence throughout the course of a whole episode. And so that gives me a little more ability to fine tune of listening to someone talk. They drop this moment. Now is when it continues on. And so I want to drop that silence in myself, or if there's a joke, sometimes you need a beat and it was missed or someone said something in the middle of it. I want to make sure that I can honor as much of those in character moments, both dramatic and comedic as possible. And that actually gets to the element of the phrase, sometimes you have to kill your darlings. There are going to be moments that you record that are hilarious. But for me, if they interrupt the story, if they interrupt the moment that is happening between two characters, it doesn't matter how funny it is, it's got to go. I have always ascribed to, when editing, the idea of humor, horror, and heart. If it's not funny in character, if it's not horror that is driving the plot forward, or if it's not heart, a moment between two characters or characters in an NPC that gives us emotional depth, most likely I'm going to remove it. I typically lean to about a 30-70 cut, 30% gaffs and humor and messing around, 70% in character stuff. This has become a lot easier as we've gone on because everyone has gotten used to my play style. And, it's something that I find that GMs early on, and especially when you're dealing with actual play, it's hard to grasp the idea that I can set the tone. I can't dictate the tone. You can't make anybody play in a style. You can tell them that, this is going to be a horror themed game. But if they start to go silly and funny and you're trying to fight against it, that's not really serving you. It's not serving them. It's not serving the story. There might be, a miscommunication on the tone that we're trying to create together, but you don't want to, especially in editing it, you don't want to feel like you are squashing what it is that they are trying to make. We're all a voice together in this, and so adjustments can be made on both sides after some conversation. But yeah, it's so important to know that you can't force the tone. You can suggest it. You can suggest it with atmosphere. You can suggest it by switching. One of my favorite things is that if a moment's really tense, but I don't want to break the players out of the humorous moment that they're having. Oh yeah, and I did this. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, you absolutely do that. And then you hear a knock on the door. Is it what can I do to just pull them back in as quickly as possible? Yeah, and as you do that, the door starts to creak open and you hear footsteps, and just bringing them back in if possible with that kind of either going from humor and trying to pull them back into those horror moments, or if they're playing a horror moment and switching it up with humor. Those everyone loves a good about face. Um, and then when it comes to the, we've talked a lot about the editing stuff so far. I think the other thing that I do want to say, because I want to make sure that I leave time for questions, because that's usually where the best conversation comes from, is that because we are dealing with games that the audience may not be familiar with, and we are trying very hard to serve the game and the game designer, something that we have done that's been very effective for us is that everyone has their character sheet in front of them. They've got the generic, the basic moves, or however they're labeled in that game. And the first time we come across one of those, the GM will read it out fully, talk about how it works, what it means, and then we'll check it off the list. We won't check it off the list until it's been said out loud to the listening audience so that we know they've heard it. It's been explained to them. We know it's been explained to us. And then the same thing with any specific moves on that character's playbook, any items, any weapons, things like that. And then from that point on, typically we will leave out the descriptions of those moves and how they work, unless it feels like it has been long enough that we don't remember it, and be like, why don't you refresh me on how does that work exactly? Because it's been, whatever, 2 story arcs since you've used it. And then when it comes to any looking up of the rules and things like that, I'll pause. We'll leave all of that off mic, but we will come back and tell them the answer and be like, okay, so we took a second off mic. We looked this up and it is this way. So he does get a hold to on, X, Y, and Z. So that we answer any of the audience's questions that they might have while they're playing it, but we don't make them sit through the 3 minutes of us finding said thing. So it's much more enjoyable for us to just take the 10 minutes off mic, find it, and then present it to them in 15, 20 seconds. And so then the last thing, once we get into post-production, as I'm editing, I make a list of pickups, and pickups for us are just things where somebody was talked over, and so I didn't hear the thing that I needed to hear, or maybe they said the wrong name, and in the moment nobody caught it. So I am dropping little verbal cues inside of the edit so that I can go back, take a list to the people and be like, hey, so the context for this is you were questioning this cop and asking them about whatever, and they gave you this answer, and you said, oh, that doesn't make any sense because Dr. Feldman said this, but it wasn't Dr. Feldman, it was Dr. Friedman. And I do those pickups because, again, as the producer, I am the surrogate ear from the audience, and I want to make sure that they're not getting confused by anything. So there's, and this is a very fine line to walk, because you're as a GM, as a player, characters make mistakes. They misremember things. But presenting to an audience, I don't necessarily want that to have an effect on things. And so I will, for the most part, remind people like, actually, it was this person who said that to you, because that could cause a tangent that will then lead us 20 minutes in another direction, and will not only be confusing to the players once they realize the mistake that was made, but will be confusing to the listening audience, and will take them down a path that ultimately leads to nothing. So I do try to keep bumpers up for the players, specifically in the sense of things that they may have noted down incorrectly or misremembered in the moment. And then the last thing I do is I pass it over to someone else for a second set of ears on it. They listen to it, make sure nothing sticks out to them that I might have missed. They also will create a name for that episode, an episode description, and then content warning tags to put in the episode. Yeah, so that's kind of the quick and dirty version of the experience that I have had with creating actual play products. Does anyone have any questions? Whether it be from something that you're currently working on or thinking about working on, I would be happy to chat about those things.
While folks think about questions, I do
Yeah.
have a question about there's something that for the Crit Show that I've always really noticed is how good the sound is. And I know that's something that you work very hard on. I've
Mm.
always been very impressed with the and I guess you record your pickups and stuff, but the lack of people talking over each other, the lack of strange mouth sounds,
Yeah.
all of that really intricate attention to detail. How much of that is editing, and how much of that is you encouraging good mic etiquette at the table?
Yeah. So it as much as possible is encouraging good mic etiquette at the table. When we first started, because I didn't really know what I was doing, we all had our own microphones, but we were all recording onto the same channel because I didn't know any better. And so I was really pushing because in my experience with theater, I've also done a lot of radio plays. And so mic etiquette is super important. And so sometimes I would have, hey, go back, go back, go back. We just start that over again because boy, he started coughing in the middle of it and he was trying to throw another idea. I just want to make sure we all understand this cleanly. So getting that mic etiquette into people's bodies is super important. And a little trick for that, if you are at the table or at least if you're at a place where you can see the microphone that people are using is, and it's just something we've gotten into the habit of, but when people are listening to a scene and then they'll move forward when it seems like they have something they want to interject, and it just gives a visual cue to everyone else at the table of like, oh, once I'm done with whatever I'm talking about, I'm going to give a breath so that person can step in. They've even gotten, I will say, they've even gotten good to the point where a lot of times a joke that it might be um, pull us out of the world, they'll even give a beat before they give that joke because they know it might get cut. So I'm very proud about that. Yeah, now you want to make your online characters use visible mics.
I had a similar question to what Amanda had asked. So you predominantly play in person, so you're not dealing with remote recording, correct?
So for all of our Let's Plays, at least one, if not two people are remote. But for our main show, for the first 2 years, it was everyone in person. And then we did switch to one remote player. And the way that I dealt with making sure that, because it's always my goal, even when we have a remote player, I want it to sound like they're in the same room as everyone else. And so I have got the microphone that we use in the studio. I've also got a little travel recorder, and I've got a tiny little box for it all. And I will send that to someone if I know they're going to be recording with us for a little bit. So they have the exact same thing we're using. It's already set to the parameters of our room. And so I know exactly what I'm going to get back.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned comic books. What have you been reading that's been inspiring you lately?
It's been inspiring me.
Or at least been
I,
entertaining you?
well, yeah, because I was loving the X-Men run when they had their own, when they had Krakoa and stuff. But and I really like Gail Simone's writing of the characters that she's currently doing, but the stories themselves, it's so hard to go from such a huge scale and try to pull the X-Men back to where they were in the 90s and have people have it feel as important. So I'm missing that X-Men on a world scale feel that we had for the last couple of years.
Do you have any experience with and I know this is something that some people here do. They do a lot of recording through things like Zoom or recording for YouTube, and then taking that sort of sound and recording and bringing it into a podcast form.
Mhm.
I know that sometimes you do it the other way around, where you will put your podcast stuff up on YouTube. But do you have any experience with the other way around? And what are the challenges there?
Yeah, a bit. Um, the um, the biggest thing I think that you have to watch out for if you are knowingly recording video content that you're then going to turn into audio content, is if you're using something like Foundry or Roll20 or something like that, making sure that everyone playing and the person running the game is keeping in mind that they have to explain what is being seen still. I think a lot of people accidentally fall into that trap of like, oh yeah, I'm just going to move right over here. Oh gosh, that thing's horrible. And they don't describe it because in that moment they're seeing it and they don't remember that they're going to have a listening audience that is not going to see it. And so just being aware that you still have to be that, surrogate ears for the audience, even if you have visuals, because that audience isn't going to get those visuals. Someone had asked about voices for NPCs. Um, this is the same thing that I do in my voice acting work, is that I will typically keep a phrase that I know for that character, um, a sentence, a couple of sentences that I know they say them. I know exactly how they say them, and when I do it, it helps me position the voice correctly. I'm also a big proponent of physical acting. That was a lot of my initial training. And so if you go back in Perilous Tides, they always talk about, they can tell how when Sayer's getting ready to talk, because I had a very specific posture that I took on for Sayer. And that is a big part of what helps me find and keep that voice. Places of tension, places of ease, where you place that voice, whether it is a head voice or a nasal voice or somewhere down in your chest. And then little things. I had a character for a long time that I would take a piece of bubble gum and I would put it between my upper teeth, not on my teeth, but my gums and lips, because it created just a little bit of a difference there. And I knew that that would be enough to change that character's voice. So finding some kind of physical touchstone, as well as a set of lines that exactly how they say that every time. And so it helps you find that spot.
Do you have an example of a phrase that you would use and how you would use it?
Um, yeah, like we had this kind of old tree character who had come from another world, and he was this wizard. And one of the first things they asked him a question, he's like, "Oh hell, I don't know," and that always stuck with me. So that was, "Oh hell, I don't know." That was the phrase I would say that would help me then get into that voice. And even between talking to them, I could, "Oh hell, I don't know," say it different ways to find, because you want to find the highs and the lows of every character voice. Doing a character voice that can't express that range gets really difficult, because you find yourselves. I did a Christmas elf, and it's very hard on my voice, but it was something I did as a lark, and then the players pulled this character in as a regular, so I had to do it all the time. But it was like, not all the like, it's real hard just to get into, but like not all of the, it kind of sounds like Meat Wad, but like not all of the things that I would normally say he could say in this kind of voice. And so I had to figure out like, oh, I guess I'll just slow down here because I can't say it fast enough. And so finding ways to slow things down or speed things up, because intentionally, not all voices should be able to handle the same kind of language. And that's the other kind of other element of finding and sticking to character voices is tempo, how quickly they speak and how much space is between their lines. And also, came from my movement class, and I've always found it really helpful. When we were studying animal essences, they talked about hot breath and cold breath. When this creature breathes out, does it feel like their breath would be hot or cold? And so sometimes I'll try to remember that too, because there's a certain breathiness and openness in the mouth behind that. Yeah.
I've got another question because I have a lot of
Yeah.
questions.
That's okay.
Back to thinking about producing. Do you find that do you have to spend a lot of time, or do you have to curb the um, instinct to also direct, or how do you involve directing and producing in actual play, um, as the producer for the crit show, as the person who is
Yeah.
the face of the crit show?
Yeah. Um, I would say that it's much more tempting to try and direct when you're running it, because there is that element of creating and helping. But not really, because I learned pretty early on, and I think this is the case with a lot of the games that we all have in common here. You can't railroad. If you do, it feels weird. It feels off. It feels wrong. Everybody at the table knows something's not right. You're on the back foot if you're trying to force them a certain way. And we're no longer telling the story that wants to be told. So more than directing, improv, I think is the more important. Like if you're going to sit down and read a book, if you were thinking about like, oh, I'm gonna read a book on directing for the stage or voice actors or whatever, I would much more highly recommend reading a book on, we've even written one, Improv for Gamers or Beginning Improv, or something that gives you that yes and, because that's going to be the most important tool in your repertory as the GM of any of these systems. Is that, yeah, okay, tell me how this works. I'm not opposed to it, but you got to help me make sense of it. And if we together can make sense of it, that's absolutely how the world is working from now on. I saw another one in the chat. Oh, do you ever have guests make appearances on the show? How would you approach folding guests into a recording session with an established table? Yes. So we have guest players on some of our bonus content. Um, with that, it's just like anything else. We have them introduce themselves. We have them talk, to the audience about where they can be found. We'll do a session 0 together so that all the players together can kind of get a vibe check for each other. Um, on the actual, because the Crit Show's main story went for 6 seasons, and it was kind of a fluctuating cast, but really it revolved around 3 or 4 people the entire time, and then they all were there at the end. The only time I did guess for that was actually more kind of akin to an audio drama, in that we would play the story, and then once it was done, I would go back and take the things that I had said and write them all down, and then I sent them to the creator of that game, and they would voice the main bad guy for that story arc. And so they could put their own kind of spin on it, but I did give them the context of the scene, so they couldn't put so much of a spin on it that the next line didn't make sense. So that was a way for us to include them in a way that they all seemed to really enjoy, because it also didn't require as much of their time, which is something that is, the most important resource we have. So that was the way that I did that for the main show. Working in guest players, I haven't done much of, other than if someone was actually joining the show, and then it would be an episode or two where it was just me and them letting the audience get a chance to know them. Yeah.
How much of the guest artist voiceover replacing have y'all done? I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with
No, that's okay.
your show.
So in each, well, I shouldn't say in each, every game system that we did, I reached out to one of, if not both of the creators, if there were multiple ones. And I was successful in the first, I think, 3 seasons that I had gotten word back from somebody involved in that team. And so um, they would maybe be in an episode, maybe 2 episodes. We're talking between, at the smallest amount, a dozen, at the most, maybe 100 lines that I would re-record with that person and drop in. So not a ton, but it was also something that I was familiar with, just doing voiceover stuff and pickup. So
Second part to that.
yeah.
Did you find that worth it? Like, did that add enough per the amount of effort it took?
So yes and no. For me, yes, because it got the creator excited, and I would also pair it with like the final episode of so if we were playing, say, the Sprawl, the last episode of the Sprawl, I would then dovetail with an interview with them about the game system, how they created it, what their influences were, and stuff like that. So I did also build it into, hey, we're getting together to record this interview. Really, the longest part was cleanly writing out whatever mishmash I had said for them. So yeah, it was worth it, because I think it was something cool where people are like, wait, who's this? And then at the end they find out that, oh, it's okay, that was the creator of the game. That's cool. And their name in this was their first AOL handle when they first started, online or whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've definitely heard that happen in the past where a voice will be replaced, and I've always been curious if it's been worth it. So thank you for that.
And I definitely wouldn't want to do it. Like, it's not something I would do for other NPCs or on a consistent basis. Yeah. But because so much of what we're doing is highlighting the game and the system, I enjoy it for that. I do know other shows that go back and replace the entirety of the NPCs, and it's like, I could never. It couldn't be me.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Rev?
Unfortunately, all of my questions are technical and they're very like DOS specific, so I probably should save those for offline.
That's fair.
Yeah, I have just one question. So, what if you have a situation when you have to replace one of the main cast members because he or she resigns?
Yeah.
What to do next in that kind of situation?
Yeah. So the thing that the big thing that you can do for yourself is try to stay ahead on your recordings. That's not something that we really talked about previously, but deciding what your release schedule is going to be and making it something that not only can you and your group be comfortable with, but something that you can get ahead. For me, ahead means 4 episodes in the bank. So a month. If something happens, I've got a month. But again, I know other shows who, and again, their turnaround time is different. Their processing is different. I know people who get 20, 25 episodes ahead. Again, couldn't be me. I don't understand that kind of turnaround, but having that little bit of a buffer. And then when someone tells me, hey, I am not going to do this anymore, or I've got something that's come up. Okay, so let's sit down and talk about how can we get you out of here. I've only had one instance where someone I was playing with, it was an ugly end, where I just came back the next stream and I said, hey, this person's not here. we all at the table had a disagreement. They could not find a middle ground with us. And so I was just very open with the audience about the situation. And in the first couple minutes of that narration, the GM had that character go off and pursue something else that the group had been working on. But when it comes to people you know, people you've worked with, people who are able to give you a little bit of leeway, sitting down with them, even sitting down with the other players at the table and kind of brainstorming, okay, how can we get you out of here comfortably? And what is the window you have for me? Is this I have to be done at the end of today? Is this I can give you 2 more recording sessions? Is it I need to be done by the new year? And I think that that's going to drastically change how you structure that exit. But really taking the time to, in a way that you normally wouldn't do this, figure out some story beats that help move that character towards the departure that either, and depending on the player and the situation, I've had situations where I've told someone like, hey, so it could be this or it could be that. Do you have a preference? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well then let's play. And it'll be one of those 2 things, but I just don't think we'll know until the moment happens which one it is. But as long as you're okay with both of them, then I think we're both happy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you everybody for the wonderful questions.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Thank you so much, Rev, for coming in here and
Yeah.
talking with us. Where can we find your stuff? Give us the pitch for the Crit Show.
Yeah. So you can find me and most of the stuff I do at thecritshowpodcast.com. We have got we started out Monster of the Week, and then the elevator pitch for the show is it is a group of friends who find themselves thrown into the position of last line of defense against the things that go bump in the night. But it starts out in Monster of the Week, and then it hops into other Powered by the Apocalypse systems as the players go to other realities, trying to track down all the things they need to build to defeat their big bad. And so they go into the Sprawl dungeon world, Rapscallion, where kind of like Sliders or Quantum Leap, the world changes them. They are still those characters, but they have now been adjusted to fit the mechanics of that world, but their mentality is still the same. And then right now we're doing Fate, and then we're currently in the planning stages of deciding what game we're going to play after we are done with our current Fate story. So yeah.
And for the folks at this writing retreat, they have done a short course of Brindlewood Bay episodes that I think are on the Patreon.
Yeah, we have gosh,
so much Patreon stuff.
We have to have at least 50 game systems we've played on the Patreon, and we have I think a dozen different actual plays on our website that have been ordered from us from either Evil Hat or Galileo Games, or there's a couple others. But yeah, so if you find yourself in a position where you are wanting a Let's Play made for a game that you are working on or have created, you can always reach out to us too. I essentially do kind of a sliding scale. We're at a point now where I do want to compensate everybody involved, but I also realize that different publishing companies have a different budget. And so we have been fortunate enough so far to be able to, anybody who has come to us, we haven't turned anybody away because we've been able to find some way to make it work between both sides.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and talk with all of us. And
yeah, my pleasure.
I hope everyone has a really nice rest of their retreat.
Bye, everybody.